Hey guys, Mr. Kavanaugh here. Hey, since we're going to be on a snow day tomorrow, I wanted to go over a few notes with you that you can have in your notebook since we're not going to be together. So I want to go through a few notes and I want to send you the notes as well so you can review the video along with the notes that I send you since we're not going to be together tomorrow. We left off, we've been talking about the creation of the Constitution, Philadelphia. We've been talking about the clauses. We left off talking about the Connecticut Compromise, aka the Great Compromise. Then we talked about the 3/5 Compromise and the accounting of enslaved individuals and taxation, and then the benefits also that would benefit many southern states and the Electoral College to come. So we talked about those clauses. But there were some other clauses you need to be aware of that took place during the convention. And it's the compromise on the importation of slaves and what became known as the fugitive slave. I have something all over me. Fugitive slave clause. As you'll see in the notes, just going through them, Article 1, Section 9, Clause 1 in the Constitution talks about, which I have it highlighted in blue in my notes, which you'll see, but the migration or importation of such persons as any of the states now existing shall think proper to admit shall now be prohibited by Congress prior to the year 1808, so 1808, but a tax or duty may be imposed on such importation not exceeding $10 per person. So what it's talking about is it's setting up a date to prohibit the importation of enslaved Africans. It's putting a halt to the slave trade. Did it stop it? No. You saw there were other states, as we talked about last year, that were still importing on the DL, but it was put in place. Did it stop it altogether? No. But it made southern states at the convention very happy, as well as the Fugitive Slave Clause under Article 4, Section 2. And what that says, highlighted as you'll see in blue, no person held to service or labor in one state under the laws thereof escaping into another shall, in consequence of any law or regulation therein, be discharged from such service or labor, but shall be delivered up on a claim of the party to whom such service or labor may be due. So what it's talking about is these escaped slaves, runaway slaves, if captured, need to be returned to their owners as property. So the Fugitive Slave Clause. Here's a question I asked you last year. Where in the Constitution does it use the word slave? And you know that it doesn't. It talks about persons, other persons. And so these compromises at the convention as well. The compromise on the importation of slaves and the Fugitive Slave Clause. Have those in your notes. So finally, as we know, the Constitution is considered a bundle of compromises, So they have all this documentation written down. Then it's going to be sent to what's called the Committee of Detail at the convention. And they will assemble all the resolutions that have passed and composed and put a document into a draft form. And then Gouverneur Morris will head up the committee on what's called the Committee on Style, and they will revise the document into its final form under Deputy Governor Morris. Finally, the document is written September 7th, 1787. We celebrate that today as Constitution Day, September 17th, 1787. I don't have you recall a lot of dates, but you may want to remember that one, September 17th, 1787. Back to the chair. I was talking about the beginning at the convention. We were talking about George Washington's chair. And on the back of his chair, there's an engraving. And Franklin talked about he did not know whether the engraving of the sun was a rising sun or a setting sun. So I have the quote in here from Franklin. And as you'll see on the notes, Franklin says, quote, "I have often looked at that sun behind the president without being able to tell whether it was rising or setting. But now I know that it is a rising sun," unquote. Benjamin Franklin. As well as we talked about this last year, Franklin leaves the convention. The story goes, a lady stops him on the street. "Dr. Franklin, what type of government have you given us?" "A republic, madame, if you can keep it." So we talked about that last year as well. What does Franklin mean by that? If you can keep it, what does he mean by that? That we all have a role to play. This is a participatory democracy, this republic of ours. And each and every one of us has a role to play every day to be engaged. I've asked this question before: what's the most powerful position within government? That of citizen. Your job as a citizen is to be informed. Knowledge is power. As Madison said, knowledge will forever govern ignorance. So we have roles to play, not just voting, but being informed, know what's going on in local government, state government, federal government, being active in your community. So we have numerous roles to play if this republic is to survive. Wow, which is another question in itself. So this new constitution would be a republic made up under a federal system. I'll talk more about a federal system, federalism, later on. So the completed document is now sent to the states for ratification. Why? They write this down, please have this in your notes. The why is they want to get the consent of the people for this to be a legal document. So that's why it's sent to the states. Each state will form or select a special ratifying convention that will debate the new governing document. But they send it to the people, so the people will have a say. They need the people, the C word we talked about, consent, for the Constitution to be considered a legal document. Have that in your notes, consent and legal. Remember, going all the way back to the beginning of the convention, they only had the authority to edit the articles. And they took it upon themselves to scrap the articles, and they came up with a whole new document. So now they need the people's consent for it to be considered legal. So each state would select a special ratifying convention that would debate the new governing document. On Article 7 of the new Constitution, you need 9 out of the 13 states were needed for ratification. So these debates ensued. And you start to see two groups bubble up and debating the new Constitution, Federalists and the Anti-Federalists. So these two groups, they start to bubble up out in the states, especially New York. So two groups emerged during the debate process at odds over the new Constitution, Federalist and Anti-Federalist. The Federalists, so the key Federalists were, as you know, were James Madison, Hamilton, and John Jay. The Federalists, they stressed the weaknesses of the Articles. And we needed a strong central government to really to get the states in order. Because as you know, when we talked about the weaknesses of the Articles, as Washington said, one day we're one, the next day we're many. So the states are going in their own different direction. We need a strong central government to bring them back together and, in a sense, to maintain some type of order, which they were all about order. So the Federalists, they stressed a need for a strong central government. Anti-Federalists, led by Henry Mason, throw Sam Adams in there, they had a few different arguments. You need to be familiar with these arguments. The Anti-Federalists, they felt that a national government would be too powerful and have too much power. They wanted power to remain at the state level, the local level, grassroots level. And they also wanted a specific list of protections, a specific Bill of Rights, which they were used to at the state level. So that was their argument, the Anti-Federalist argument. The central government would have too much power. They wanted power to remain at the state level, and there was no specific rights, no specific Bill of Rights in the Constitution. Madison didn't want a Bill of Rights. Madison opposed a Bill of Rights for 3 reasons. Have these down as well in your notes. Be familiar with these. Madison did not want a Bill of Rights. He felt there were enough rights that were specifically listed in the Constitution already, which I'll go over later, like habeas corpus, no bills of attainder, ex post facto laws, things of this nature. We'll talk more about later as we delve deeper into the Constitution, into the body. But Madison felt there were enough specific rights already in the Constitution. Any list would be too long, is the second reason. The third reason is we're bound to forget one. So that means if we forget it, do you not get that protection, that right? So those are Madison's big arguments against a Bill of Rights. Again, there were already specific rights in the body of the Constitution. Any list would be too long, check, too long, and they were bound to forget one. Does that mean you do not get that right or that protection? So that was Madison's argument. So as these debates ensued, you started to see a series of newspaper articles, especially in New York, starting to appear, written anonymously. But as you know, they became known as the Federalist Papers. The authors of the Federalist Papers, again, John Jay, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton. The purpose of the Federalist Papers was to explain the Constitution to the people in order to get the people to ratify the document. The people, they don't understand the document. The Federalist Papers, it's like an owner's manual to the new Constitution. It's going to explain initially why the articles are terrible and why we need this new governing document. So you start to see these newspaper articles appear in New York newspapers and eventually spread throughout the states, hence the Federalist Papers. So explain the Constitution to the people in order to get them to ratify the Constitution. And then you start to see what are known as the Anti-Federalist Papers, again, written anonymously under pseudonyms, Brutus, Cato, but the authors are probably Robert Yates and George Clinton. The purpose of the Anti-Federalist Papers was to convey the dangers of a large central government, convey the dangers of a large central government. So that is where we are. So these two groups go back and forth, bickering left and right over the Constitution. We had looked at some of the Federalist Papers, which you should have some working outline on each of the Federalist Papers and Brutus 1 that you will see on the AP exam. So quickly, I'm going to go through some of my notes on the Federalist Papers you were supposed to look at and Brutus 1. And I'll send these along as well, and you can add them into your notes and compare them with the outlines that you've already done on the assigned papers, Federalist Papers and Brutus 1. Federalist number 10, Federalist 1, probably the most famous of all the Federalist Papers, authored by James Madison. Federalist number 10, quote, "The public good is disregarded in the conflicts of rival parties. Measures are decided by the superior force of an interested and overbearing majority. A number of citizens, whether amounting to a majority or minority of the whole, who are united and activated by some common impulse of passion or of interest, adverse, opposed to one's interest, opposite in position, adverse to the rights of other citizens or to the permanent aggregate interests of the community." So going back to adverse, opposed to one's interests, opposite in position. So really, as we've talked about before, this paper is all about factions. Groups with specific political interests. We still have factions today. Go all the way back into, and when we talked about different forms of who governs, go back and look at the pluralists. We talked about specific groups that all have political interests in mind. And these pluralists, these factions, are led by what Mills talked about, the power elite, these specific individuals. So factions is the topic of Federalist number 10. Madison talks about then how to control the faction. How can it be controlled? Can you get rid of it? Madison talks about removing the faction. We can destroy liberty, freedom, which gives the faction life, or citizens can have some options. Same options, same passions, same interests. Really, the factions can't be removed as you look around today. he only hopes that it can be controlled. And he talks about this Republican remedy in Federalist 10. Madison hopes that we have such a large republic that it will be able to stop the spread of the faction. Or, as I like to talk about also, we'll have enough countering, like a mathematical equation, we'll have enough countering factions that they can check each other before they wreck each other. So that is Federalist number 10 by Madison. Factions. How can we control factions? We can't destroy them because to destroy them would be to destroy liberty or take their liberties away. So that's Federalist number 10. Federalist 51, Madison. As we've talked about before, Madison in Federalist 51 talks about the different branches of government in keeping each other in proper places. It's about checks and balances, which we'll talk more about. I want you to percolate. Can you think of five checks in your head right now between the branches? Take 5 seconds. Write down 5 checks. No examples of checks and balances. Veto, overriding the veto, judicial review, advise and consent, and hence. You know, Madison goes on to talk about in Federalist 51, if men were angels, government would not be necessary. But we all know we are far from that. If men were angels, government would not be necessary. Madison goes on to talk about you must enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. I love that word, oblige. You must enable the government to control the governed, and in the next place, oblige it to control itself. Madison was talking about auxiliary precautions, because men are not angels. Federalist 70. Hamilton talks about the executive branch. And Hamilton talks about a strong, singular executive. A defense against legislative encroachments. Having a strong executive, the power to prevent tyranny of another branch. A strong executive can act with speed and deliberation. Think about post 9/11, George W. Bush. Congress can be slow and cumbersome at times when you have individuals debating the issues of the day, which that's what the founders want. The founders wanted them to take their time and debate the issues, but sometimes expedient action is called for, and that's what Hamilton is talking about in Federalist number 70. And he goes on, he talked about also about, I believe it was under the Articles where they wanted this executive by committee. I believe they wanted 3 presidents at the time. And he just talked about how that was a terrible idea because they would be pointing fingers at each other all the time. Nothing would get accomplished. So Hamilton promotes a strong singular executive in Federalist number 70. But as you'll see, Hamilton did love a strong executive. Some individuals called him a closet monarchist. He wanted a king. But there would be checks in place to put on this strong executive or vibrant executive that Hamilton wanted. This energetic president, as Hamilton talked about. This energetic president that Hamilton talked about, this president would have a willingness to represent the citizenry and protect property also, or check that Hamilton talks about in Federalist number 70. Federalist 78, Hamilton. The topic is the judiciary department. Justices would be on the court for a time of good behavior. The courts are the arbiters between the legislative branch and the people. They interpret laws, prevent legislative branch from exceeding power. He wanted an independent judiciary. Let me fix a typo. Independent judiciary. The reason for independent judiciary, remember, judges under the crown, they were dependent on the crown for their salaries. And so the judges under the crown would be biased to the crown. But if we have an independent judiciary, the idea would be that these political ideologies would be left at the door. No. We've talked about this before. Hamilton said that the judiciary would be the weakest branch of government. Well, is it? Some people today consider it to be the strongest branch of government. You could have 5 unelected individuals changing the will of the people, and you have the individuals, the talking heads, talking about gross judicial overreach or judicial activism, legislating from the bench. 5 unelected individuals, because all you need is a 5-4 decision on the court to overturn something of the legislative branch or the will of the people. We'll talk more about that later. Maybe if Congress would stop producing such crappy laws, then the court wouldn't have to overturn them. Ooh, that's right, I said that. Ooh, I did say that. We'll discuss that more later. So that's Hamilton, Federalist 78, the judiciary. Quickly, Brutus I, some debate on who authored it. Brutus I, the first of the Anti-Federalist Papers, which you'll probably see on the AP exam some way, shape, or form. The author is considered Robert Yates from New York. He argues that the new Constitution gives Congress too much power. And he considers federal law, the supreme law of the land, as overreach. Things should be at the local level, the state level. The national government would have too much power to tax the states as well. And the states would soon be annihilated, he goes on to talk about, due to tax. He also speaks on fallible humans. I love that. Fallible humans in Congress who will have an agenda and subvert state authority, will lead to a loss of trust by citizens. What about fallible state legislators? Don't get me started. Fallible humans in Congress who will have an agenda and subvert state authority will lead to a loss of trust by citizens. Yates may be onto something. Also, impossible to create one set of natural laws to govern such a large, diverse country. And that's Yates and Brutus I. So those some of my notes, which I'll forward on to you on the Federalist Papers we were supposed to look at, as well as Brutus I. Have them in your notes, and we'll review over this. And when we get back together at the end of the week, we'll look over, we'll discuss finally the Constitution being ratified and all wrapped up. So those are some notes for you to look over while you're at home tomorrow on this lovely snow day. Get the sleds out. Get back to me if you have any questions or concerns, and I will talk to you later. Peace.